I work my way to the top, ayy. I cannot fit in the middle, ayy. I cannot fit in the middle, ayy. I cannot fit in the middle. I work my way to the top, ayy.
2020 has brought us so much crazy turbulence, so many crazy twists and turns. I mean, it just feels like it's never ending. And we are at December 18th, and it still seems to be a lot of stuff that is going on. So this year is not going to go out without a fight. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about lessons that I've learned from 2020. And I went ahead and wrote a whole list of lessons that I learned and L's that I took. And so if you look at the thumbnail, you'll probably see the L in it because I've taken a lot of L's. And depending on how you look at it is going to determine how the L's are processed, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to talk about three lessons. I put an L up. 3 lessons that I learned in this year about myself. 3 things that God revealed to me. So the first thing, without further ado, I was not as firm in my faith as I thought I was. I was not as firm in my faith as I thought I was. And I'm sure in most of these L's that I'm going to bring up, I'm sure many can relate to during this time because in our lifetime, at least, most of us have not been in a situation like a quarantine. Most of us have not been in a situation where we couldn't do what we wanted to do or we had to operate with so much fear and anxiety. So for me, I found myself worrying way more than I had ever done. I had worried more than I ever thought was even possible in post being saved. So I never knew that I could be so anxious and so worried about things that I couldn't control. And as 2020 has progressed, I found myself going through really ups and downs, a lot of highs and lows. So on some days I was just like, man, I can go out without a mask. I can go out and God got me. And there are other days where I'm like, man, I just don't even want to leave the house because I don't want to put myself at risk. I'm worried about other people I come in contact with, not even necessarily about me, my own personal well-being, but just the well-being of other people. And it was just so many reasons to be worried. And also just worrying about, man, will there be light? Will there be even light at the end of the tunnel? So there was a lot of things that I was just uneasy about. So my faith as a result, initially my faith, it really took a nosedive down. And it wasn't my faith in Jesus Christ necessarily, but it was my unbelief in what God could do for me and that God had me. And it was like indirectly like, yeah, I believe that God loves me. I believe that God is a protector, that he is a keeper of his people, that by his stripes we are healed, so on and so forth. But it was one of those things where I just began to get weary. And the Bible talks about weariness. It says, don't be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. But the key caveat is we cannot faint. But I found myself falling and I felt myself drowning at times because of the circumstances that we were in. And I spent a lot of hours in this room, this very room that I'm doing this video in. But I found myself wanting to faint. I found myself not wanting to quit. I couldn't see myself quitting, but I found myself getting very weary, wearier than I've ever been. Everything just felt so much heavier. It felt like the weight was on my shoulders. But then I was reminded of what it talks about in the scriptures where Jesus says, take upon his yoke, and that his yoke is easy and his burdens are light. And so me being the servant of God that I strive to be, God always was with me. God always kept and protected me, and he always would sustain me. So it was really a matter of me submitting more and more to God. And that was where I struggled, was submitting something that I thrived in all of my early years, even up to 2020. And my faith then was trusting and doing my best to align with the divine will of God, not the permissible will, but the divine will of God. So for the longest, I had no issues with that. But in this time, I found myself having trouble discerning what that will of God is. But the easy way for us to be in alignment with the will of God, and this is what helped me to kind of get back into the center place that I'm in now, right in the center of alignment is where it talks about be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed. Now, I'm a King James version person, so be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So not allowing the world to shape my thought process, even during this time. The world has a lot of great things and some good advice when it comes to the pandemic, and has a lot of things that are helpful as far as wisdom, but the wisdom of God is greater than the wisdom of man. And it says the foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom that is of man. So we still got to reach people. We still got to bring people to salvation. And we have to bring life and light to people. We have to bring love to people, because we know that we're in a time that is just lacking love. We're lacking that social interaction. People are lonely. People are experiencing crazy levels of depression and anxiety and so on and so forth. I can go on and on. So we still have to do ministry, but my faith at times wavered because I allowed myself to get weary, even in well-doing. I never stopped doing ministry. I never stopped serving in my church, but I felt myself getting weary because I was discouraged by what was happening in the world. Number two, another L that we took in this year, and this isn't just me, but I think this is reflecting from my personal experience because I can relate to this, but another L, and this is probably the largest L I think we took during this time, is our faith as a church had been so tainted in American values that it completely distorted our perception of what persecution is. And also just the mentality that as Christians, we are called to suffer. And I don't mean that in a very Calvinistic or however your favorite suffering preacher way. I just know that the Bible does say that we will suffer for Christ's sake. But I think a lot of times we got it convoluted with, the pandemic and measurements to protect people from the pandemic were the equivalent of persecution. Now, let me be very clear. I don't like the church shutdowns. I do believe that the church, if Walmart and all these other places can get guidelines for staying open, if the airport can stay open where people are just scrunched in on this plane, no 6 feet apart, no healthy social distancing, just mask, how much more could the church then implement some of those things? I feel like the church can and has done it. And if you're a part of a church that has practiced the social distancing and wearing masks, you'll see that it's worked out, and God has kept many people in the congregations, and he's done that for us. So I say all of that to say, I don't love a lot of what's happened, but I do think that we as a church have gotten so caught up in this American Christianity where the way we conceptualize it is that every little thing is now persecution. I don't believe all restrictions were persecution, but I also looked at them as a glass half full, where there's more opportunities for us to hit the streets. We can finally get out of the 4 walls of the building. We can finally get out and actually reach people. But what ended up happening was we got so caught up in what we couldn't do and what the government was doing. And I do agree. I don't agree with all the government was doing. However, what I do say is whenever the church is stifled or limited, we must step out and do something more radical. And I'm not saying radical as in reckless. Like, I'm not going to tempt the Lord just because God is in me, that I have the gift of his spirit in my heart. I'm not going to tempt God and purposely put myself in situations where we can be sick, because we're not guaranteed protection to never be sick, to never be ill, but we do have a God that can help us, that can heal us, so on and so forth. So the way I would look at it is we still take those precautions, but we can't, and this is the thing where we took a huge L in, and this is still tying in with this point. We were so tainted by American values that the church heavily got tied into conspiracy. The church heavily got tied into conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories were so reckless. Oh my goodness. The virus conspiracies, a lot of people were falling into the nonsense of there was a conspiracy on the mask were oppression. Like, come on, fam. Like, I don't agree with the mask oppression conspiracy. I don't agree with the conspiracies against the vaccine, although I'm still skeptical. I don't want to get demonic. I don't have them. See, that's the cool thing about when you don't have the ability to be monetized. You can not be demonetized. So, long story short, I don't know if the vaccine is good or bad, but I'm hoping for the best and I'm praying for the best from it. But at the end of the day, I know our help comes from God. So I don't get too caught up. I don't get too bent out of shape on these conspiracies. And then you have conspiracies about the election. That's still going on. And I'm not going to say my thoughts on that. I don't really know. And again, it's okay to not know. We can see things and be suspicious. There are several things that I question, but I don't know if I can question it to the extent that something radical needs to happen as far as change. But I do question a lot of things that I've seen, but I don't have the full context. Only God knows the full context. But people are saying these are the last days that where the mark of the beast is coming through this whole process of people. They're going to get chips implanted as a part of getting the quote unquote cure for it. It's just too much radical talk and not enough biblical talk. A lot of radical, a lot of conspiracy talk, and not enough Bible is being preached. Just not enough Bible. And I think, as Christians, we can be skeptical. Again, we are in the world, but not of it. We know that there is some wickedness. We know that there is some conspiracy. We can't deny that there is some element of conspiracy that takes place in this world. But the problem is when we lift up conspiracy over our calling, and our calling is to be peacemakers, not peace takers. I think a huge issue that we have, reading the comments, Berg, you throwing me off, man. I'm on my rhythm. You know what, though? My mom actually sent me in the mail like this little red cloth that her church, they were putting over their door to symbolize the blood of the Lamb. So interesting you say that. So a lot of times people get so caught up in conspiracies to the point that they're missing out on what we're actually called to do. And we're called to love. We're called to preach the gospel. We're called to love people. We're called to spread love. We're called not to get into these petty disputes that don't advance the gospel, but actually do the opposite. So these are things that we're directly called to do. Now we can have our opinions on things. We can have our opinions. There were apostles, there were disciples that walked with Jesus that were very political zealots. They were very much interested in what was happening in the Roman Empire that was happening during that time and how it was stifling the children of Israel. They wanted Israel to be restored back to them. They wanted things to be given back to them. But the thing was, Jesus, and actually, let me see if I can pull that up real quick, because I love how in Acts chapter 1, the response that Jesus gave. Let me pull that up real quick, because I think if you get this perspective, it really helps to shape how we should view the matters that are going on in this world. Because I think oftentimes we get so caught up in what's going on in this world that we miss out on our actual calling. So check this out. So Acts chapter 1, and I'm going to start at verse 6. And so we'll try to read this in context. So it says, so when the apostles were with Jesus, they kept asking him, Lord, has the time come for you to free Israel and restore our kingdom? And he replied, the Father alone has the authority to set those dates and times, and they are not for you to know. Isn't that crazy? He says the Father alone has the authority to set those dates and times. So God knows when COVID-19 will be over. God knows when all of these things are going to transpire that we seek after politically and so on and so forth. He understands. He knows when the last, obviously he knows he says no man that knows the hour or the day. And Jesus knows when he's going to make his return. He knows all of this. But then verse 8 says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere in Jerusalem, through Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So check it out, guys. That is our focus, and we often lose sight of that. But our focus is to be witnesses of God and his power specifically, and he gives us the Spirit to be able to be witnesses. It helps us to be not only witnesses, but effective witnesses, because without the power of the Spirit, we can't conquer sin. And if we can't conquer sin, our witness will be tainted and marred by our very transgressions and the things that we still have transpiring in our lives. But the power of the Spirit not only gives us the freedom from sin, but it gives us the ability to preach the gospel and to live it in our lives. I think I'm preaching, but I don't know. This is Truth to Preachers, so I hope I'm preaching by the grace of God. So, final point, one last point. One last L that I took in lesson that I learned was, I learned who my true friends really are and who really are my supporters, who really are, as you so to speak, are in the doghouse fighting for me, who got my back. And what I learned was that many will come and go, but true friends and supporters, they care. They care about me. And they also care about the impact that their decisions have. A true friend won't just make a decision that's going to impact you and other loved ones that are around you. But a lot of times people just look out for themselves. They only have themselves in mind. And it's not to say that you can't make a decision for you and your family absent of your friends. But it's to say, if you're following God, you're going to be mindful of the decisions that you make in reference. Like, there are certain things that I can't do because I know if I make this mistake, that's going to send a bad message to my friends. Or if I don't keep my word in this area, it's going to hurt people. Or if I don't leave on a good note from this situation, it's only going to hurt me. And I experienced a lot of heartbreak in 2020. And it all was centered around selfishness. It was all centered around ulterior motives. It was centered around just people not having a true desire for loyalty and the ability to grow even when things are rough, even when things are not ideal. So, but what ended up happening that I think was the biggest blessing was it aligned me more with my purpose. So I felt more aligned with God because of the heartbreak that I experienced. My favorite quote, my wife hates this quote, but I always would say this, and I heard it at a young age and I kept it with me, and it's helped me a lot through my dating life and things like that. Or maybe it didn't help me, who knows? But it's better to have loved and had love lost than to not have loved at all. And that's how I treat a lot of relationships that I have with people and like friendships that I've built over the years. I'd rather have loved people as much as I can and had that love lost or had people do me wrong than to not have loved at all. But as a result of those experiences, I've grown as a Christian. I've been better suited to serve. I've been better suited to add value. And also the final thing that I've learned as a result of it is I learned how to guard my own heart. The Bible calls for us to keep our hearts with all diligence because out of it are the issues of life. And we have to guard our hearts because we're constantly under attack, not only from Satan, but we're under attack from, sometimes we attack ourselves. Sometimes other people attack us. Sometimes people make bad decisions. Sometimes people close to us hurt us really bad. So we have to guard our hearts. And so I learned in this season how to guard my heart. And also I learned how to love and add value to people. And I've grown tougher skin to be able to deal with the fact that you're going to deal with situations where people who you think, are loyal to you just aren't. But we can all grow from it. And so the last thing I'm going to leave you all with, this is getting a little bit longer, but what I want to say is we have the choice to take this L and let it mean whatever we want it to. We have a choice to say, oh, I'm going to take this L and it's going to mean a loss. So typically when we say L's, hold this L, that's a loss. That means you lost at something. But you could take it as a loss or a lesson. You could take it as an opportunity to learn, or you could take it as you could focus on what you weren't able to do in this year, what you weren't able to gain, the loss that you had. And I know a lot of us lost a lot of, whether it be people, whether it be things, jobs. So many people have lost so many things. So I don't want to underscore that. I would say that it is a matter of our perspective. If we stay in a place where all we can focus on is what we lost, then we'll never truly get to the place where we can grow and gain. And I just think about where the Bible says, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And we die daily to ourselves. We die daily to our desires. I had so many things I wanted to do this year, but you know what? There were things that I didn't even think about that I wanted to do, that I was able to accomplish, that I would have never been able to do. Like, I was able to grow so much. I think this 1 year of being at home with my wife so much, working from home, I've been able to get so much closer and learn so much more about myself and my wife than I would have ever done if we were just in our busy lives, trying to figure out things and trying to squeeze out time to spend with each other. But for me personally, I had a lot more wins than losses. And that just was God's grace for me. Like, I've been blessed way more over than I took losses. I hadn't really experienced any losses that are notable up to this point, and that's God's grace. That's all by his grace. But I know people that have experienced some great losses, whether it be loved ones, whether it be significant others. And so I want to use this to say, as we look to 2021, we got to stay encouraged. We got to stay motivated, knowing that God's not done. I love the verse in Philippians 1:6 where it says, being confident of this very thing, that he which have begun a good work in us will perform it unto the day of Jesus Christ. God's not done working. And so we may only have a little bit more than 15 or so days. I forget how many days we have left. We probably got about 12 to 13 more days of 2020. But let's make the most out of it and understand that God's not done working. And so God's going to continue to do what he does best, and that is keep his people. So let's continue to trust in him, and let's turn these L's into lessons.
I work my way to the top, ayy. I cannot fit in the middle,